Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
When you think about wines, vineyards, and the process of making wines, you think maybe about Europe or Napa Valley in California. But maybe you also should
think about Wyoming.
We're here in Huntley, Wyoming at Table Mountain Vineyards. We'll learn about the process from vineyard to wine. That's next on Wyoming Chronicle.
Funding for this program was provided by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.
It's our pleasure to be at Table Mountain Vineyards here in eastern Wyoming with Patrick Zimmerer. Patrick, welcome to Wyoming Chronicle.
Thank you.
The first question on my mind is, why a vineyard here?
Well, it's kind of a story rooted in agriculture and then followed with a little education aspects of that. But I'm fourth generation on the farm. Our farm was established in 1926. My great-grandfather was a World War I vet and came to the Goshen County area, the southeast Wyoming area, looking for a land to homestead and ended up here. So our farm has seen sheep, cattle, corn, beets, and anything that you can pretty much productively grow in southeast Wyoming is how our farm has evolved over the years. I was a senior at the University of Wyoming in agribusiness, ag economics, and we had to finish a senior thesis to graduate.
So you were working to continue your work in agriculture?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, and so I was an ag major, like many ag majors, trying to find a way to get back to the farm or consider even going back to the farm is hard because more people on the same amount of land isn't always ideal or profit out. So just looking for ways to diversify the farm, having that kind of open mind, alternative agriculture is kind of how we randomly ended up with grapes. We were here over the winter. I was here on winter break, and they kept announcing a meeting about growing grapes, and we're right next to Nebraska, so the University of Nebraska had an informational meeting about growing grapes, and it was January, it was 30 below. We were feeding cattle on the feed truck. It kept going. It sounded like a great idea just to get out of the feed truck and go to town where there was some heat. So my dad and I went to that, and they basically explained how these new varieties were around, and it perked my interest enough for me to kick out my senior thesis paper, which was due in about 2 months, and basically just start from scratch and write a whole new one about growing grapes.
So how did the family react when you said, you know what, we ought to do that here?
Well, my dad's always been kind of a wild spirit, and he's always liked growing things. He's really the green thumb in our family. So it didn't take much to give him a poke and let him do that. After the paper was done, we toured a few just wineries in the region, believe it or not. Nebraska, Colorado had some going at the time with some of these grapes that we were growing. And after the senior thesis was done, we said, we have all these little spots of land that we can't irrigate productively. Let's pop in a few vines. We did all the research, so let's do it. My mom was a little more hesitant on that, some of the rest of the family, because on a farm you have lots of jobs. We had a lot of cattle and a lot of other ventures, so adding one more thing to the to-do list sometimes was a little not as fun as we saw it to be.
We were talking off camera. The University of Minnesota's research really is what has allowed growers in this climate to do well.
It has. They in the early 80s or late 70s, they decided to start a grape breeding program built upon kind of some hobbyists and some guys in the Midwest who were already doing it, and they took it up a whole nother level. So most of the grapes that we've had probably the greatest success commercially with are anything that have come through that program. There's about 6 different grapes that they have created and hybridized over the years that really work for us.
So for those of us who aren't great wine connoisseurs, we understand basically that, some great European wines from France and from Italy, and then there's the great American wines maybe from the Napa Valley. What's the difference in the grapes that are grown here versus in those areas?
Well, a purist also, with winemaking regions all over the world, it's really about the place that they're grown in, not just the type. If you really get specific to Cabernet, tastes different in California versus here and there. And so I don't know if we have a taste of place, if you will, in Wyoming. We've always just been glad we can get grapes to grow. So that's kind of our first checklist off the bucket. Can they grow here? And then we'll worry about what they can do in the wine. But most of the grapes that can survive colder climates in Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, they're really based on a cold hardy program. So they're American grapes crossbred with wine grapes. And what we get is smaller clusters, a very short growing season, and really intense flavors, but a lot of them really take on a lot more fruitiness. They express a lot more fruit and berry flavor than a traditional wine grape would.
We'll go out in just a little while into the vineyard and actually test the sugar content of the wines, but you started with a few hundred vines and now it's over 10,000?
That's correct. In 2001, shortly after writing the thesis, we planted 300 vines. We called the nursery. They have grapevine nurseries in upstate New York. And we said, we're going to plant some grapes. And the guy said, where are you from? And we said, Wyoming. And he kind of chuckled at us a little bit because, there's Wyoming, Michigan, and some other Wyoming cities. And when he found out we were from Wyoming, the state, I guess we're always proud to say our state first and our town later, I guess, if you will. But he was really taken aback by that. And he goes, well, all of these grapes are on a 2 to 3 year wait list because they are hybridized and we can't get them out as quick as the demand is. And so after chatting with him a while, he said, I think we do have a few vines. They're not what you want, but we'll get them to you because we, as foolish farmers, thought you call the Vineyard supply company and they send them to you and you plant them. We had no idea there was a 2 to 3 year wait list. So that very first year we got our feet wet. They grew. We weren't able to kill them. I guess we looked at it as if they will grow.
That's a positive.
Yeah,
right?
if you will grow them, they will come. And so we actually did get on the wait list for some of those varieties that we couldn't get. And throughout the years, we planted a few thousand every year up until about 2008. And then we kind of said that's enough for us. And then the new IT variety came and we planted a few more in 2014.
So tell me what the great challenges are of growing grapes and having your vineyard here.
Well, one of the craziest things is just to know that they can grow here. Once you get that kind of negativity out of your mind, our first few years were, are they going to come back? Are they going to come back over the winter? Are they going to come back in the spring? And once you realize they do, your biggest challenges are that early fall or early spring frost. That is one of our biggest challenges because we do get really warm in April and then we can be 20 degrees mid-May or even early May. So fighting off or warding off that early frost, we can't do much about. We have found varieties that actually take longer to come out of dormancy. And so that's something we look for in the grapes that we plant, or when people plant them, we kind of recommend don't plant this one. They're an early bud breaker. And then on the other side of the coin is the early fall frost. And then in between that time, it's everything we all face in agriculture in Wyoming, hail. For the most part, we don't have a lot of diseases in the vines, but hail, wind, and just really, bad weather beating up the vines is kind of our biggest enemy.
I've read about the 2006 hailstorm you had to endure. What did that cost you?
Well, it cost a lot of pride, I guess, because that was right when our vines really were starting to produce, and we were very hopeful. I mean, we were talking tons of grapes and not a few thousand pounds. So it was a really bad setback for us. We had a Wyoming Ag in the classroom out here 2 days after the hail. Some people part of that group said, we know you grow alfalfa, but what is that field? And I mean, we were just completely decimated. Our farm, our buildings, everything was decimated. So I guess that was our first test of how strong grapes are. We work really hard the first 3 years of a vine's life to get that root system established. And believe it or not, when something catastrophic like that happens, they will come back from the ground or they will come back on top. And we were actually able to get a harvest. We had a very late October. They came back with their second bud and we were able to get a harvest. So that was a year that we said, I think these things are here to stay for a while. So
originally you wanted to take the grapes that you grow here into a winery in Cheyenne and have them do the rest of the process, so to speak. But that didn't quite work out that way.
It didn't quite work out. When you're growing all these grapes and you're out in the field sweating away, it's like it would be great to have a winery so we could be in the air conditioning in the summer. But we had worked with the winery at the time. There was one in Cheyenne, and this was in the early 2000s, and they were really excited about getting a Wyoming grape on top of what they were doing. And that summer when we called to double check, they were disbanding. And so that really forced our hand a little bit. I think possibly we would have probably come around to a winery at some point, but it really forced our hand in 2004. And it was amazingly how quick we got it done.
Now, there aren't many, if any, other Wyoming growers who do the growing part and the winery part all together in Wyoming. Is that correct?
Yeah, and our big joke was when we planted our first few hundred vines. Well, I really think after our first 10 vines, we became Wyoming's largest vineyard. And we kind of joke around with that. We have met a lot of other growers who dabbled in it or
kind of
had some hobbyists, if you will. And a lot of them would bring grapes to us over the years. But we are the largest commercial vineyard, as far as I know, with the acreage that we have. And then on the wine side, carrying that forward from, what we grow into the production side.
Best year you've had. When was it?
We were talking about that earlier, and it's hard to believe we've had some vintages under our belts. With grapes, you really get one shot a year. So if your fruit goes, that's it. 06, 07 was a bad year. But 17, the year of the eclipse, and that's an easy year to remember, was probably our best year. The grapes, the sugar levels were off the charts. Our pH was where it should be, usually in Wyoming. And with every year, we're fighting either the sugar or the pH or the acid. And in 17, nature just did its thing.
You've become an entrepreneur. You host gatherings, weddings, other things here on your site. How has that evolved and as part of your business model, so to speak?
Well, I don't know if that was ever part of it. The more you diversify, either the more tired you get or the more employees you need. And we joke and say we are a mom, pop, and son shop. And we really do work this part of the business a lot more than our farm part of the business. And our farm has evolved and changed a little bit in how we do that, and have worked on a lot of event hosting here as well. So, for the most part, weddings, we do sip and paints, just various type of rentals, Christmas parties. And so we've put a lot of feathers under our hats, probably sometimes too many, but I guess it's just kind of, again, our agriculture base that when the job presents itself, we take the challenge and get it done. So
I want to steer away a little bit from the vineyard. You wear another hat that is of great relevance this year. You're also an attorney. And unfortunately this year, that component of your job has kept you very busy with the canal collapse here that's impacted so many farmers here in southeastern Wyoming.
Yeah, I do work for the Goshen Irrigation District. They were one of my, I'm not a full-time attorney, so I don't like to be judged for my attorney hat. I like to show up in my attorney hat just for a little bit of mystery, if you will. But I do work for the Goshen Irrigation District. Water law is something I'm very interested and passionate about. And it was a tough year for Goshen County economically. And then we had the canal collapse for Goshen Irrigation District, which affected about 50% of our irrigated acres here. The grapes are not part of that water system. So the grapes kind of were on autopilot this year. I did a lot more meetings and paperwork than I usually do, but
it's been, suffice it to say, it's been a tough year for
it has been a tough year. We've seen, like you said, we've seen some economic challenges in Goshen County, the canal collapse, and then just most recently a tornado. So the fact that we're even going to have a harvest this year, I don't know how the vines skipped all of the crisis that we've had here in Goshen County, but we've missed the weather and the storms and all of that.
Can anybody just start growing grapes and then turn them into wine, or is there a permitting process that you have to go through? Is it significant?
From the growing standpoint, no. All of the vines that we're growing are available commercially. I mean, I definitely recommend getting them from approved sources, kind of in upstate New York or Minnesota. That's where the breeding base is, and you get the best quality of root stock. So I'd recommend that. The winery process is a federal and a state process, and sometimes a local process. So, if you're doing some homemade winemaking, you can make up to 200 gallons, I think, each year without a permit or anything like that.
But people will find Table Mountain Vineyard wines in different stores in Wyoming.
We also retail across the state. We're in about 50 to 60 different liquor stores. Our wholesale game has slowed down a little bit because we're doing a lot more stuff here on site. And so we don't quite have the employee base to expand like we want to, but at the same point, we try and just keep it very small and organic as we go into some of these stores. So you'll be able to find our wines at 1 or 2 select retailers, usually in a city, or we can ship direct from the winery as well.
So give us the vision now for the vineyard. Continue as is, expand even more. What's your hope?
Well, you know, we're coming upon 20 years for some of the vines. When we started this, 20 to 30 years seemed like a very long time. They think that's kind of the productive cycle of a vine. We don't know how long the vines will live after that. So there's got to be a little long-term looking at which varieties, if we are going to replace them, we'll probably go to new varieties that we haven't even tested yet. Because every year there's some new varieties that through the research programs, they're even better. The University of Wyoming's even dabbled in grape research a little bit, trying to build the new, better winter hardy, cold hardy grape. So I guess just looking at where the breeding is and where the rootstock is, and right now production-wise, we always have more grapes than we probably can handle. We do process them all, but just trying to find that ebb and flow of how much grapes equals how much wine, and how to make that all work out.
It seems to me nationally maybe the market for wine is seeing an uptick. Do you experience that?
Wine kind of is one of the solid sectors, I guess, of the alcoholic industry. It's always been pretty steady. Right now, you know, cider's making a huge splash into the scenes. Ironically, cider disappeared because of Prohibition. Everyone tore up the apples, and so people are now getting back into commercial apple growing as well. We even have some apple trees on our place. But the wine industry has been pretty stable. Craft distilleries, microbrews, all take part of that market. But, you know, wine is the original taste of place. I mean, if you can find a winery that grows wine or makes wine from what they grow, you really do get to experience agriculture from start to finish. And again, we've looked at this whole process not as a venture in the wine industry, but more of a expansion of agriculture. And so you really are tasting from berry to bottle at our place and any local winery.
Let's go take a look and see what the sugar content is and see if these things are ready to harvest.
All right, you can almost smell them, but I think they are, so.
I can't wait to taste them.
Okay, let's do it. Yeah, so this variety here is our Frontenac Gris, and we'll find a good cluster to pick. Right over here, maybe? Oh, yeah. So we wish they all kind of look like this, but this is a variety called the Frontenac Gris, and then when we pick, we just pick right to here and pull that whole cluster out. So, and the Frontenac varieties are very long. A lot of people think wine grapes and think they'd be huge, but the grapes that grow here are pretty small. So
we're filming this just a little bit before harvest. Are those ready to harvest, and how do you tell?
So the easiest way to tell, and this is a pretty simplified scientific way to do it. There you go. Oh, there you go. So this is just a refractometer, and all this does is measure sugar in grapes. So it measures a percentage of grapes. And if you did this scientifically, you would go select just random clusters, mash them all up, and get a uniform sample. We just kind of go by quick and easy here. So you just squeeze the juice on the refractometer here, get it all nice and filled in. Pop that down, and then you pop it in the sunlight. And that reads just about 23.
So what does 23 mean?
So 23 is brix, B-R-I-X, not like bricks in a house, but it's a measurement of sugar. So in the wine world, you measure sugar based on brix. And once 23 brix actually converts to alcohol, once we add the yeast to the juice, at about 56 to 60%. So I always just do a quick 50% cut. So 23 brix gives you about just about 12% alcohol potential if the yeast were to do its whole job. So we kind of shoot for anywhere. Oh, see, and then you have to get a few more samples here. And these guys have shot up to actually 27. And you can kind of look on that too if you want to look. And there's a line where there's
sure
blue,
enough.
and
Very easy to see.
I was looking low, but the line's actually a lot higher. So we tested these last week and they were at 23. So they've bumped up about 4 degrees. So 27 gets us just right about 14% alcohol.
So
if the yeast were to eat everything. And what we try and do is balance the sugar. The other test that we would do is acid, because grapes are basically sugar, water, and acid. So once all the sugar goes away, you've got this wonderful fragrant aroma of wine. But if it's very acidic, then it will be like eating a lemon, very tart, very acidic. So we have to counter the sugar with the acid at all times.
So what, relative to sugar, what are you looking for in order to know that it's time to harvest?
Really, one of our jokes here in Wyoming, although we have been this is our, I guess, 12th big harvest. I'd say since 2007 we started harvesting tons, not pounds. But, a lot of times our hands get tied with the weather. So we will pick based on we have to do it or we won't get a crop. But for the most part, we look at sugar, we look at ripeness. We have about 14 different varieties that we grow. And we kind of know the order that they ripen in. So the Gris are kind of in the middle. We have one variety that we'll start with first. And then we just go by there and go on the sugar levels. So
would this be almost ready to?
This is very high. If the rest of them are panning out like that, we're probably good to go. So
we're filming this in mid-September.
Right.
Is this generally the time of year where harvest begins?
Typically the Gris will have either be picking right now or have picked. We're about 5 weeks behind this year.
And
weather related,
moisture,
right?
Rain, etc.
We had a lot of moisture in June. Almost, I think somebody said 70 to 80% of our typical annual moisture level we got in about 2 to 3 months here in Goshen County. So our moisture levels were very up this year. The grapes actually expanded a lot of green, a lot of bushiness to them. We weren't able to go in and cut them back as much as we usually do. So the grapes put on a lot more growth. But in grapevines, you want them to put all their efforts in the fruit. Right. And this year they put all their efforts in the greenery. So. And then another good indication is just basic taste. All of these grapes, as small as they are, all have 2 seeds in them. And you know the grapes are ripe when the grapes start to crunch in your mouth. So,
well, I have to test.
You better try it out.
You bet.
And these are a fairly acidic grape, so you'll get that sweet, but you'll also get that tart to them. And you can actually chew the seeds.
Mm-hmm. It tastes great. It really does.
And that's that's kind of, the beauty of this. And the Frontenac is one of the grapes that actually we figured out that grew really well here. We trialed and errored with about, like I said, we have about 14 different varieties in the ground. The Frontenac variety didn't come along until, I don't think we got a plant until about 2005. But it's got 3 gene pools basically. So there's a Frontenac Red, a Frontenac Gris, which is this one, Gris, G-R-I-S, meaning gray in French, I believe. Look at us being Frenchies here. But it's just another color for amber. And then there's actually a third Frontenac called the Frontenac Blanc. And we have all 3 of them here that we had picked a little earlier. But you can see, they really are the same grape. If you did a genetic test on the vine, it would say Frontenac. Mm-hmm. But these are all just mutations of the red grape. And so somebody went and found this mutation and started breeding this mutation. And within the Gris, there's some white. They started breeding that and selecting these 3 very distinct varieties. So even though they're the same variety, you can make about 6 different types of wines with these 3 different grapes. So, and they all have a different taste and a different flavor.
It does taste a little bit different. I would say this was not as sweet as the first grape that you had me taste.
We will see.
And I would say the green ones here might be. So it's all a function of sugar.
It's all a function of sugar. Mm-hmm. And typically the reds will ripen first. Their biggest problem is their other function is acid. Mm-hmm. And so the longer the reds stay on the vine, the acid will eventually drop. And so we leave the reds on as long as possible to try and get the acid down, because in reds you don't really want an acidic wine. So the reds are actually shooting at about 23%,
okay,
which gives us about 12% alcohol. So a little less. You did pick that one out. And if you do this long enough, you can kind of go by taste
Sure
to
you
know
can, yeah.
when the flavors are there. Or we have a few varieties that we actually pick before they get ripe because they kind of do some weird things in fermentation. So we actually pick some ahead of ripening. So, and these are the Frontenac Blancs, and they are at 24% as well. So out of the three, this is our ripest. And then we went to here and then to there. So, which you can't really tell by looking at them, but. And a lot of that, again, is just weather-based. As nights get a little cooler, the sugar will shift, we'll have highs and lows. If we get a little rain, the sugar will go away. We get some nice hot days like they're predicting, they'll put a little more sugar back in. So
heat's your friend at this time?
Heat is our friend right now, and we know we're pushing it in, I like to say mid-September, but we're kind of past mid, aren't we? We're past the 15th.
But you're in the right part of Wyoming to...
We are in the lower part, and so we do get blessed with some longer summers, but anything really after about 28 degrees will kind of end our harvest this year.
When you do harvest, how long does it take you, and how many people are going to be here working the field?
Well, and again, that's just kind of a function of the yield and how many grapes we have. We know we're down this year. It's always hard to estimate yield, and we aren't that scientific that we go through and calculate how many pounds are in each vine. But typically we'll begin harvest. This year we're about 5 weeks behind, but we usually start almost on Labor Day and go as long as we can. So usually 4 to 6 weeks is a typical harvest. So
it takes a little bit of time.
Yeah, and then in terms of labor, everything here is very manual, very labor intensive, and so we rely on a lot of just people looking for work on the weekends or second jobs, but we'll have at any given time 20 to 30 people just helping us pick with the picking part. So
it's been great to see what you do here, Patrick. We can't thank you enough for being our host today, and thank you for joining us on Wyoming Chronicle.
Well, thanks for having us.
Really
Let us tell our story.
Funding for this program was provided by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.